Thank you very much, Rick, and it is indeed an honor to be here before you today. You know, as I was listening to Chuck speak, and my wife and the two of us are there just yelling amen and so forth, and I'm looking at my notes. See, I've got this outline, and Ann is saying, start crossing out, Roger. Cross out that. And I could pretty much cross out everything I've written down here, and I hope I'm not too anticlimactic. I do want to share a few things with you from the heart today. And Rick, thank you so much for introducing me. My admiration and regard for you is beyond what I can really express. I guess I'm going to begin with a quote. Ann and I had worked for one of our very favorite people when he was first in Congress, Congressman Ron Paul. And we got to know back in those years, that was a 76, 75 back then in Washington, his family, including a little guy with kind of an attitude that would come into the office. His name was Rand. And even nowadays, Carol Paul jokes of kind of the big shot-itis that Rand had a little bit, kind of the take on the world kind of an attitude. And I think that's quite true. I want to touch on that in a minute. But Rand has taken up where his father left off, of course. And his bill is called the Life at Conception Act. I might need a drink of water here. Life at Conception Act. And it's rooted, among other things, in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And of course, bless you. Thank you. And establishes, of course, what we already know, that life begins at conception, and all the same protections of the Constitution must extend to all life from conception forward. But he mentions here in this article that he wrote, he says, I also believe it is imperative for states to pass their own laws protecting life. And he goes on to talk about the state of Kentucky, where he is from, and how they've, in his view, been able to do some real good there and are continuing along that path. And then I'll just read you the ending of his column here as kind of a good jumping off point for my remarks. As a physician, I've treated 1 and 2 pound babies in the neonatal nursery. I've looked into the eyes of those tiny, miraculous beings. Whether they are in the womb or not, how can we say they don't deserve the right to be defended? One of the first things I learned as a physician was to do no harm. When I was elected to the Senate, I took an oath to defend your constitutional rights. As such, I believe it is both our moral and constitutional duty to protect the unborn, and it is time we restore America's respect for life. Chip off the old block, Rand is, that's for sure. But you know, Rand did have an attitude, and I'm going to say something right now. We need to have an attitude. We need to have a very bad attitude when it comes to the carnage around us. We need to get up in the morning with a real chip on our shoulders. We need to get mad. Christians need to get mad. And no, not mad at the mothers that are in various very trying and touching situations. We need to reach out to those people, to love them, to care for them, to help them, to do everything we can to encourage them. But no, we need to be mad at the politicians, including the phony politicians, as Chuck says, that claim to be pro-life. We need to be mad at the judges. We need to be mad at the inaction on the part of most of us. We need to have a bit of an attitude about all the churches that do so very little. in one sense, we are winning. I can see some signs of that, and that's encouraging, and I appreciate Derek saying that. He's such an encourager. But if one life dies while we're sitting here, we're not winning. We're still losing. And no doubt, just during the time that we met here, probably another abortion happened in Montana, and 50, 100, hundreds across the country, and thousands across the world, just in the short time we've been here. I don't call that winning. And I appreciate what Derek had to say, because there are some great signs, and we should be encouraged by that. But we're not winning until every baby is safe in the womb. And it needs to begin with God's people. That's where it needs to start. We're all familiar with 2 Timothy, 1:7. God has not given us a power, He has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline. Do we believe that? Do we act that out? Is God just joking with us? Or do we really live that? And there's no better place for that to be tested than when it comes to standing for the most defenseless and innocent among us. I'm going to tell you a little story, an illustration, because truly God's people need to be leading the way, and too often we are not. And I have to say it like I believe is on my heart. Let me talk about a little bill that I had back when I was a legislator in 2005, and it was a bill that required death certificates to be issued for the unborn. Now that in itself is nothing. I mean, a child is just as dead with a certificate or without. And it wasn't what I would call a great bill, but it was sort of a forerunner, if you will, to personhood, because it acknowledged that we lost a person every time a baby was aborted. But the important thing with my bill is it required that the provider sit down with the mother before an abortion was performed and say to them, probably something written down that they needed to read or whatever, that the state of Montana recognizes the child that you are about to abort is indeed a person, a full person. And therefore, the state of Montana will issue a death certificate for this person whose life you are about to end. Do you understand that? That the state of Montana recognizes this as a person, as a human life. And then I can think maybe the interview continuing on something like this. And I need to ask you, have you chosen a name for this person? Or do you just want the state to assign a number? If so, it'll begin with the letters LG or LB, once we've determined gender. Little girl, 34496, or little boy, 56291. Now, some people will say, oh, that's mean-spirited. I don't think the baby in the womb would say that right at that time. And we must be their voice. But I guess what I wanted to point out from that bill, and of course it failed, and I'll mention a little more about it later, never got out of committee, but the hatred that descended upon me from those from the pro boards. I mean, I had vicious phone calls that would just hang up on me. I had hateful pranks. Every night somebody else was delivering 6 pizzas to my door. I had horrible letters to the editor. I had my home newspaper, the Chronicle, let's see, here's basically what the Chronicle said in an editorial. They unanimously denounced me as me and my bill as divisive attention as a divisive attention getter a bill as a hopeless publicity stunt, and the entire issue of abortion as, quote, pointless and irrelevant. They even justified the hate pranks on me that I basically had it coming. Well, that doesn't surprise any of us, does it? Of course not. But what did the Christian community do? If you're hearing silence right now, that's because that's what I heard. Not from everyone, of course, but the degree to which the Christian community remains silent, largely silent, the pulpits, silent, and no action whatsoever, not even encouraging phone calls, tells me something. They say silence is golden. Well, sometimes silence is just yellow, right? And I think when I say that we need to have an attitude, we need to wake up in the morning with an attitude, we need to have a little bit of that burning anger inside, we also need to have the courage to take action. And my paper's all curled up here, but anyway, and it's just, to me, saying, well, gosh, it's just too controversial, it's something we can't get into. What is more controversial than the bloody human carnage all around us? And Christians, we simply can't, we can't pass this off by saying, well, it's something we'll vote right, and so often what's happened is these good folks, but folks in the churches, they're satisfied with putting their names on a Mother's Day ad in the newspaper. They're satisfied with sending money to, excuse me, but Chuck was absolutely right, phony organizations that they think are fighting for the right to life. I was part of one of those organizations. I was on the state board of Right to Life of Montana. And until I began to question these things and began to question why they were endorsing the liberal Republicans in primary races, and why they were they were staying away from personhood and staying away from bills that count, and just simply nibbling around the edges, and I began to ask questions. Pretty soon I was cut off. And the degree to which I was denigrated by these people around the state, and the degree to which the president, after a while, and here I am, a board member, supposedly governing the organization, and she cuts me off from, she blocks my emails, so she doesn't have to listen to me anymore. This is the kind of nonsense that I had to deal with, that I saw from the inside. So what Chuck is telling you is absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so, it's not enough to just simply, give money to organizations that you think are doing good and feel satisfied with that. One organization, and clearly some of these organizations, like Right to Life of Montana, are actively lobbying against personhood. And while promoting bills that do not save life, do not save one life. And, and other organizations probably more quietly. One organization, I'll say it, the Family Foundation, Montana Family Foundation, that raises an enormous amount of money. When I talked to their head individual at the time, and I said, look, personhood is where it's at. That is absolutely where the activists and the people that really want to stop this carnage are fighting. This is where the action is. And you need to join the team. And then I quoted from Patrick Henry, his famous speech. I said, the next gale from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brothers are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? And I don't think he ever forgave me for that. But indeed, why stand we here idle? Organizations that stand idle or actively work against the unborn while claiming to be pro-life are organizations that we need to both expose and have nothing more to do with. And again, all these this feel-good legislation that they promote simply diverts valuable resources and distracts us from the task at hand. And as Chuck said, and creates protective cover for those politicians that are on the wrong side but end up getting 100% scores on right to life and family foundation scorecards. They do more harm than good. In the end, I honestly feel that these kinds of organizations, frankly, do more to kill personhood than all the pro-abortion organizations combined. Well, I guess the other thing I wanted to share with you, and I've probably been up here too long already, but I just wanted to share just one or two other thoughts. I do want to mention, it's kind of important, and this is a big topic that I'm just going to barely touch on, just kind of get you thinking a little bit. But Chuck is absolutely right that it isn't ultimately a partisan or a political question. But we also do need to be aware that there is a distinct connection between political philosophy and the value we place on life and the degree to which we become a culture of death. The pervasive, frankly, ideology in both parties, and certainly the Democrat Party, but among many Republicans today embraces coercion and force and violence and crushes the human spirit and cheapens human life. And it replaces God the sovereign with government the sovereign, with self-government with big government. And frankly, these people, when you talk to them, you begin to realize where their values are. You know, they place more value on ferrets than fetuses. They care more about solar cells than human cells. You know, care more about the beating of a bat's wing than the beating of a baby's heart. And I think we need to recognize that when there is a political philosophy that essentially embraces force and violence, it has no problem ultimately justifying the ultimate violence against the most innocent among us. So we need to be aware of that, and that's one of the reasons, again, these political endorsements and protective cover that some of these organizations provide are so harmful, because it ends up electing folks like that really, at their root philosophy is one that leads to cheapening life. The other thing I want to say is it's very clear that our opponents hate the truth. They hate truth. And in that sense, this personhood bill is very, very important, because it initiates a conversation with the people of Montana, and it brings into focus the importance of acknowledging every human life as precious, and that all life begins at conception, that from conception every life is indeed a person fully deserving of full protections of our Constitution. And so, you know, even if the bill doesn't get through, and we need to shoot for victory, and I believe we can have victory. I truly do. But God has a way of using us and using situations, and whether this bill ultimately succeeds, Ultimately, we have a referendum on the ballot, a constitutional referendum amendment, and ultimately that's passed by the voters. Along the way, we are doing a lot of good by being here today and by promoting this idea. And Derek Skis, I can't thank him enough for what he's doing, because these are all little victories, and God is going to see to that if we're faithful to Him. So I guess I would just and I have to point this out. The other side hates truth. They hate truth. They want to cover our eyes. They want to plug our ears. They want to gag our mouths. They don't want truth to get out. And all you got to do is go to any college campus and try to talk about the right to life and talk about conception, about the life at conception and so forth, and you'll find out pretty quick just how much you're able to even be able to express yourself and what kind of an opposition you're going to get. It's no different than if you're trying to present the other side on evolution creation. Are they going to let that debate go forward? They hate truth. They hate light. Climate change and global warming, and they don't allow that debate to go forward. They don't allow us to speak. They censor us. This is the way of the left, and the way of our opponents, the pro-aborts, is always that they cannot deal with the truth. They cannot defend themselves when there is an open debate, and they will do everything they can to censor us. That's their way. And again, that's where this bill really helps to get that out there and really helps the cause win or lose. Finally, I just want to wrap it up with this. One of the things that I learned from my death certificates bill is that we need to talk more about the human side of humans. And it was a real eye-opener for me. What I found out was that that essentially that we needed to talk about, tell the stories, I guess you would say, of those little ones that never came into being in this world. To be able to imagine what they would have been like. Obviously they were not faceless fetuses, and we need to put faces on them. And that's what I ended up doing during the hearings. I found that the Democrats in particular were not particularly moved by science and by logic. But when I started to get them to imagine what they had lost, when I talked about here in Montana, 2,000, 2,500 children a year that are lost to abortion, and I said, imagine them standing before you now, just from those that were aborted 5 years ago, little 5-year-olds, filling this room, filling the hallways, filling all the meeting rooms of this Capitol. And here they are now, little girls in sundresses and little boys in dirty jeans and crooked baseball caps. Can you see them? Can you see them? Children frolicking in playgrounds, taking bubble baths, skinning their knees, buying a Christmas present for Daddy. And they're all gone. And several of the committee members, all Democrats, came over to me later, and they said, I couldn't vote for this bill. Politically, it would have been disaster, but it was the closest I had ever come when you put it into those terms. So I think, at the end of the day, we can have our political arguments, and we can have our logical arguments and our scientific and medical arguments, and those are all good and powerful in the right places. But I think after all is said and done, we also need to remember to continue to put a face to those that are lost from us. and get people to imagine just all that we have lost and all that they could have been, because that's really what it's all about. Finally, I have to thank Governor Bullock. Governor Bullock, in his State of the State the other day, some of you may have listened to it on TV, he made this statement toward the end of his speech. He says, quote, "We need to keep our kids safe." And I couldn't agree with that more. And if we work at this with courage, with conviction, with an attitude, with a real attitude, I would like to think that there will come a day when people will look over this way at our state and they'll say, "Oh yeah, you know, Montana, that's the place where they don't kill their babies. Montana is a safe place for life, a safe place for freedom, for everybody, because the beginning of life is the beginning of liberty." From the moment of conception, Montana's babies are safe and free. God bless you.